My sister set a cash box down on the hood of my car, snapped it open, and said, without looking up, $2 each, or 3 for 5. Everything on the end table has to go today. It was my car. It was my hood. It was 4 in the afternoon on the 13th of August, and I was standing in my own driveway with a duffel bag over my shoulder. Delaney is my only sister, and she'd had my keys for 3 weeks. I'd asked her to water the tomatoes while I took a travel contract at a hospital up in Reading, and I'd come back a day early because the last shift got canceled. There were 3 folding tables on my front lawn. Orange stickers on my lamps, on my mother's sewing machine, on the cedar chest my grandmother gave me. $60. A card taped to the front with "sold" written on it, and the lid standing open where somebody browsing had lifted it, quilt shoved off to one side. She recognized my voice before she turned around. She still didn't close the box. 2 of my neighbors were at the far table. The Duffys, whose driveway runs alongside mine, had stopped mid-sentence. "Don't apologize to her," my sister said to them, loud enough for the sidewalk. "Every stick of this was handed to her. She's never earned one thing in her life, she just keeps it and keeps it until somebody makes her stop." A man came up the walk with a paper in his hand and asked which vehicle the chest was going into. Handwritten receipt. $60, cedar chest, paid in full. Dated last Tuesday, 9 days back, while I was 400 miles north, and this house was supposed to be sitting empty with the sprinklers on a timer. I told him I'd be refunding him myself. I counted $60 out of my wallet into his hand in front of the neighbors, and then I asked him for one favor: sign the bottom of his own receipt and print the date under his name. "And the time," I said, "put the time on it too." He did it on the roof of his car. I wrote his plate number on my parking stub, and I photographed my yard 11 times. Every price tag, the cash box, the sign on my mailbox, the open lid. The lid I saved for last. The quilt had been pushed aside in there, and under the fold of it, the corner of a black hardbound book was sticking out, stitched along the spine. Not mine. I pulled the quilt over it, closed the lid, and stood with my back against it. My keys had cut 4 marks into my palm. I hadn't noticed picking them up. My grandmother is 79. She was born in the house she still lives in, 4 streets from where I was standing, and she has told everyone at her church that her granddaughters look after each other. If I made a scene on that lawn, the story would be at her kitchen table by Sunday, and she is not strong enough this year to hear what her family actually is. That's why I kept my mouth shut. I gave myself 30 days instead. By the middle of September, I meant to know the name of whoever handed my sister money for a chest she doesn't own, and what she agreed to hand over for it. She sold 2 more lamps before the light went. Then she carried the cash box into my kitchen and asked what I wanted for dinner, in a completely ordinary voice, like a woman who'd spent the day doing me a favor. My grandmother sent that chest over in a neighbor's truck on the 1st of May, 2019, the morning I made my first mortgage payment on this house. She stood in my empty living room with her purse still on her arm and said it was for the things I bought myself. I was 24. I had a folding chair, 2 jobs, and about $400 of equity. I'm Edie Pruitt. I'm 31, and I finished paying off that house last June with 5 years of 2 shifts a day. If somebody in your family has ever decided that what's yours was never really yours, stay with me through this one, and tell me down in the comments what you'd have done standing at that cash box, because what I did took until October to land. The sale had been advertised through Sunday. I didn't tell her to cancel it. At 11:40 that same night, the 13th, my mother called me. She lives 20 minutes out in Turlock and she does not call after 9. She was crying. She said Delaney had just asked her for $2,600, that she wouldn't say what it was for, that she'd asked her not to tell me, and that she needed it in her hands by Monday, or she'd lose everything. My sister has never asked our mother for $1 in her life, not when her transmission went, not when her hours got cut. I wrote the number on the back of that receipt and set it on top of the chest I still hadn't opened. $2,600 by Monday, or she loses everything. My sister has never owed anybody that kind of money. Somebody had set that price, and I had 4 days to find out what he had set it on. She made coffee in my kitchen the next morning and asked if I wanted eggs. I said yes, I ate them. There is a version of that morning where I put the receipt on the table between us and make her look at it. I've run that version 100 times since. In it she cries, and she apologizes, and she has an answer ready by lunchtime, and I never learn one single thing that's true. So I ate the eggs and asked how her stepdaughter's summer was going, and she said Tessa was being difficult about volleyball. At 9, I sat in my car at the end of my own street and wrote to the staffing office at the hospital in Reading. I asked for a printout of my badge activity between the 23rd of July and the 12th of August. Every door I'd opened, every time I'd clocked in and out, an automatic reply came back, promising 5 business days. Warren was still at the curb. My sister's husband had dropped her off at 7, and at 9, his truck was idling in front of my mailbox with his phone up against the wheel. He has not walked through my front door in 3 years. Not at Christmas. Not the week our grandmother came out of the hospital. He didn't lift his head when I backed past him. I was 12 the first time I stood on a sidewalk while somebody else decided which of my things were worth carrying. We were 4 months behind, and the man from the rental company set our boxes out along the curb at 2 in the afternoon. In October, in the middle of a school term. My mother knelt in the strip of dead grass sorting them. 2 hours. Winter coats, yes. My books, no. What I remember is the sound of a neighbor's screen door opening and closing while she worked. Over and over. People coming out to watch and going back in. After that, I understood the rule. Nothing is yours until there's a piece of paper somewhere with your name on it. And even then, you had better know exactly where that paper is kept and who else has been near it. I didn't ask my sister a single question that day. Questions tell people precisely what you're looking at. At 4:10 that afternoon, a woman pulled up for a dining set she said she'd already put $200 down on. 2 weeks ago, she said. In cash. In this driveway, while I was still in Reading. I told her the plain truth. Nothing on this lawn belongs to the woman who took her money, and I'm the name on the deed. She looked at my sister for a long moment. Then she said she'd already filed a dispute with her bank that morning, and she got back in her car. My sister told the next 2 people at the table that the woman had changed her mind about the color. The ad ran through Sunday, and I let it run. Saturday morning, she carried the tables back out, and I stood at my kitchen sink where the window looks over the driveway. She had priced my dining chairs at $12 apiece. Between 8 and 1, 19 people came up my walk. I wrote down every license plate on the back of a grocery receipt, and where I couldn't see a plate, I wrote the make and the color and the time. 2 of them asked her about the house itself. She told them it was going on the market in the fall, and that the family was finally getting it cleaned out. Warren parked across the street at 11 and sat there for 20 minutes with the engine running. She walked over twice and leaned into the passenger window. He never got out. He never came inside. At 11:30, he pulled away without her, and she came back up the driveway rubbing her thumb across her phone screen. In June, she'd asked me 3 separate times when my contract started. Once at our mother's, once by text, once in the parking lot of the pharmacy. I'd thought she was being interested. That night, she cooked. She made the chicken thing with the peppers that she makes, and she opened a bottle of wine and asked whether I wanted to drive up to Poplar Street together in the morning and see Grandma. And she talked about her mother-in-law's dog, and she laughed at something on her phone. She was easy in my kitchen. She reached past me for my own colander without looking, the way you do in a room you know. At 9, she went to wash her hands and left her purse open on my counter, and lying across the top of it, on a split key ring, were 4 keys. 2 of them were mine. Sunday morning, my grandmother's kitchen smelled like the same coffee it has smelled like my entire life. Verna Hobbs was born in that house on Poplar Street in 1946, in the back bedroom, and she has never lived at another address. She was up at the counter in her church clothes, cutting a melon into pieces small enough for company. She told us that Ada Duffy's sister had asked after us at the 10 o'clock service, and that she'd said, "Both my granddaughters, they look after each other. I never have to worry." She said it to the melon. She said it the way you say a thing you've decided to be true. Delaney kissed her cheek and put the good plates out. Halfway through, my grandmother went to the drawer by the phone for the church bulletin, and the drawer was too full to slide, and she had to take a handful of it out onto the counter to get it open. Envelopes, a seed catalog, and a yellow one, unopened. The yellow they use when they want you to feel it in your stomach before you read it, with a plastic window, and her name showing through. I don't open other people's mail. She had it in her hand for maybe 4 seconds. She said, "That's the water district. They send that every year," and pushed it back under the catalog and got her bulletin out and shut the drawer with her hip. The return corner was facing me the whole 4 seconds. It was not the water district. It was a company with 3 words in its name and a post office box in a city she has never been to. And along the bottom edge, in bold, in the size of print, she cannot read anymore without her glasses on, and her glasses were on the windowsill. "This is an important notice regarding your property." She sat down and started telling Delaney about a woman at church who has a new hip. Monday morning, I was standing at the county recorder's counter at 8:35 with my driver's license in my hand. You can walk in. Anybody can. That's the part nobody knows. Every piece of paper that anyone files against your house is public, and for a few dollars a page they'll print you a copy with the county's stamp pressed into it, which makes it a document a lawyer can use instead of a printout anybody could have typed. I asked for everything recorded against my address in the last 90 days. The clerk came back with 2 documents. The first one transferred my house from Edie Pruitt to a company called Vantage Row Holdings, LLC, recorded the 5th of August. Signed, according to the stamp at the bottom, in front of a commissioned witness on the 4th. In this county, with a license number and a seal. The second one put $180,000 of new mortgage debt on my house in the name of that company, recorded the 6th. I paid that house off in June of last year. 74 payments. I had the paper in a folder in my closet, the little slip the bank sends when it's finished with you, and the thing is finally, actually, yours. The signature on the transfer was mine. Not close to mine. Mine. The lien was right. The way the E collapses into the A was right. I stood at that counter with my thumb on it and had to go back twice before I found it. My D has a straight back, and this D had a loop. 1 letter. Somebody had practiced. The clerk asked if I wanted these certified, and her voice came to me from a long way off, and I said yes, 3 copies of each, and my hands did the whole transaction while the rest of me stood off to the side of my own body. There is a man in this county who watched somebody sign my name, and who wrote that down in a book with his own seal beside it. He doesn't know yet what he wrote down. I didn't leave the building. I went down 1 floor and asked about the property fraud alert, which is a free thing counties out here run. You put your name on a list, and the day anybody records anything against your address, the county emails you. She signed me up in 4 minutes. She said most people find out about it the way I had. Then I did the next part from my car in the parking lot, with the certified copies on the seat beside me. I called the title insurance company from my closing in 2019. That's the policy you buy once and never think about again. And it covers exactly one thing well: somebody forging you off your own deed. I read the claim line, the recording numbers off the stamps. Then I wrote 2 letters and sent them certified, return receipt. So a card would come back to me with somebody's signature on it. 1 to the insurance company, 1 to the lender who put $180,000 on my house, telling them the borrower on their loan does not own the collateral, and enclosing the county's own stamped copies to prove it. That's the whole move. It isn't dramatic. You don't get to watch it work. You put a flag on a piece of property and then you wait for somebody to try to walk past it. The clerk's receipt for my certified copies printed the time on it. 8:35 a.m. I folded it into my wallet behind my license and drove to work. My sister makes her living moving names around on paper. In 9 years, she had never once had to read what was already on it. My mother texted me at 9:10 that morning. I read it in the hospital parking structure with my badge already clipped on. She had moved the $2,600. It had gone out of the account my father left her, the one she does not touch, the one that is supposed to be the reason she never has to ask anybody for anything at 80. And then, the second message. Honey, please don't say anything to her. She was so upset. She'll pay it back. I typed 4 different answers to that in the elevator and sent none of them. Here is what I know about my mother. She is 61. When my sister was small and sick, she sat up with her. When I was small and sick, she left the medicine on the counter with a note because she had a shift. Nobody in my family thinks she chose. Everyone in my family knows she chose. I worked 10 hours in sterile processing, which is a job where you count. Every instrument that comes back to me gets counted, cleaned, inspected under a light, counted again. And if a single clamp is missing, you stop the entire line until it's found. 11 years of that. It's not a job for dramatic people. When I got home at 7, her car was in my driveway with the trunk open. There were 4 boxes in it and a lamp lying on its side, wrapped in one of my towels. My mother's sewing machine was on top. She came out my front door with a 5th box against her hip and saw me standing at the end of my own driveway and did not put it down. She said the light in here is terrible and half this stuff is going to storage anyway. And I said, which storage? And she said, God, Edie, don't start. I stood there and let her load it, all 5 boxes. She backed out past me and lifted 2 fingers off the wheel. 12 hours earlier, a woman at a public counter had handed me the paper that ended her, and my sister drove away from my house with my grandmother's sewing machine in the trunk, waving. Tuesday afternoon, the title insurance company called me back, and a woman with a very calm voice said the words I had not let myself want. Forgery is a covered risk. It is, in fact, the covered risk. They accept the claim, they will defend my title, and they pay for the attorney. Not a payment plan. Not a deductible I'd have to find. They hire a lawyer, and the lawyer works for me, and the bill goes to them. Her name was Rosalind Kerr, and she called me 40 minutes later from a car. She gave me 3 rules before she gave me anything else. 1. Do not open that chest. Not the lid, not a corner, not to look. The moment I touch what's in there, it becomes something I handled, and everything found inside it belongs to my story instead of to the case. 2. Do not record any conversation with any person in this state unless I say out loud that I'm recording it. Say the sentence. Every time. In front of everyone in the room. She said people assume the recording is the weapon. It isn't. The sentence is. 3. Do not set foot inside my sister's house or her car or her office, not to retrieve my own property. Not with a key I have a right to use. She said. They are going to need you to do one wrong thing, and they're going to leave the door open for you. Then she told me what she'd found in an hour that I hadn't found in 5 days. My house was already in escrow. Vantage Row Holdings LLC had it under contract to a real buyer with a real loan, and the file was scheduled to close on the 8th of September. 21 days out. She said the money from that sale would be gone into 4 accounts within a week of closing, and after that this stops being a house I get back and starts being a number somebody owes me. 21 days. I wrote it on the back of the parking stub with the plate number on it. They had 3 weeks to finish selling my house, and they were going to spend those 3 weeks walking straight into a piece of paper I'd already mailed. Wednesday morning, a county investigator named Hollis Barnard stood in my hallway with Rosalind Kerr and asked me to sign a form giving them permission to search my own home. He was about 60 and he had reading glasses pushed up into his hair and a cardboard box under his arm like a man picking up dry cleaning. I signed. I stepped back to the far wall. Kerr stood between me and the chest with her hands in her coat pockets, and she had told me in the driveway exactly why, so that afterward, nobody in a courtroom can put me within arm's reach of it. Barnard opened the lid. He lifted the quilt off with 2 fingers under the fold, the way you'd lift a bandage. It was a notary journal. That's the bound book a commissioned witness is required to keep. Every signature they watch, in order, in ink, 1 line each. And when the paper is a deed, when it moves a house from one name to another, the law out here makes them press the signer's right thumbprint into the line beside it. Not optional. That's the one part of the job nobody gets to skip. He put on gloves and turned it to the 4th of August. My name was on that line. Edie Pruitt, printed and signed. Beside it, in the identification column, my driver's license number, the real one. All of it, correct. And in the last box, pressed into the paper in gray ink, a thumbprint. I have never in my life met the man whose seal is stamped in that book. Barnard wrote out a receipt for it on a carbon pad and handed me the yellow copy. My name on the top line. 1 bound journal. Black cover. Seized as evidence. Then he sat down on my step and went backward through the pages the way you'd flip a phone book. And somewhere around 40 pages back, he stopped and turned the book toward himself, away from me, and held it flat with the heel of his hand. He read that page for a long time. Then he said, not to me, in a voice you'd use to check a number. How long has she worked at that office? Thursday evening, my sister let herself into my kitchen with the key I had asked her for twice, sat down at my table, and slid a printed page across it. It was a schedule. 2 columns. Rooms on the left, dates on the right. My garage the first weekend of September and the rest of the house by the 12th. She had typed it. She had used a font. She said the new owners were being extremely generous about the timeline and that she'd fought for me on it. Then, while I was standing at my own counter, she picked up her phone and called our grandmother, and she put it on speaker, and she said, "Grandma, guess what? Edie's finally letting go of that house. I told you she'd come around." My grandmother's voice came out of the speaker into my kitchen. "Oh, honey, that's a load off. That house was too much for one girl." I took my phone out of my back pocket, laid it face up in the middle of the table, and said the sentence. "I record anything to do with this house now. My lawyer's instruction. You're welcome to leave." She looked at the phone. She looked at me. And she stayed. She stayed 15 more minutes. She told the room that I had always been like this, that I'd let Grandma pay for my breaks in 2016, that I take, and it doesn't even occur to me that other people have lives. She told me Warren had been more patient with me than I deserve. She said the word hoarder twice. She said everything on my lawn had been handed to me, in my house, into a phone lying face up on the table, 16 inches from her hand. She looked at that phone 9 times while she did it, and she kept talking. When she left, she took my ice scraper out of the drawer by the door because it's a nice one, and pulled my door shut behind her hard enough to rattle the glass. Friday, in an escrow office on the other side of Modesto, a woman named Marlene Ostrander opened a certified letter with my name on it. I wasn't there. I've had it described to me twice since, once by her and once by a man who was standing at the copier. She read it, and she pulled the file, and she went through it standing up. And then she went into her manager's office and closed the door with the file still open in her hand. By noon, the sale was suspended and the buyer's lender had pulled its approval. 40 minutes after that, a company representative for Vantage Row Holdings called the escrow office 4 times. That's what the flag does. There's no siren on it. A woman opens an envelope on a Friday and $180,000 stops moving. The staffing office in Redding sent my badge report that afternoon. 21 pages. On the 4th of August, I badged through the sterile corridor at 6:52 in the morning and out at 7:04 that night, 400 miles north of the county, where a man with a seal wrote in his book that he had watched me sign my name. I read it in my car outside a taco place with the engine running and the air conditioning on my face. My hands were shaking so hard I put them under my thighs and sat on them. I didn't call anybody. Not Kerr, not my mother, not the investigator. My sister had spent the summer selling a house she was never going to be allowed to close on. Let her keep spending. Nothing teaches a person faster than money they've already committed. Monday morning, Hollis Barnard called me about a license plate. I had given him the parking stub in a sandwich bag on the day he opened the chest, because it had two things written on it in my handwriting: a plate number and the time. He ran the plate. The truck belonged to a man named Gil Yarborough, 68 years old, who lives out past the fairgrounds and buys and resells household goods for a living. Gil Yarborough was not a stranger who saw a sign on my mailbox. For 6 years he has been on a call list. When a brokerage clears out a house before it goes on the market, an estate, a foreclosure, an old person moved to a facility, somebody at that office calls the people on the list and lets them walk through first. He gets it cheap. The office gets the house empty by the weekend. The office is the one where my sister has worked for 9 years. Barnard said it the way he says everything, like he was reading me a parts number. He said, "So he wasn't at a yard sale, ma'am. He was at a clean-out." I stood in my kitchen with my hand flat on the counter. Clean-outs happen before a sale, not after. Nobody empties a house they intend to keep. The tables on my lawn on the 13th of August were not my sister stealing my lamps for a weekend's cash. They were the last afternoon of a job somebody had already been running for weeks, on a schedule, with a list of names to call. I'd given myself until the middle of September. It took 11 days. And now I had a man with a business license who would very shortly be asked to choose between my sister and it. Wednesday we filed. Rosalind Kerr filed a suit asking a judge to say out loud, on the record, that the paper transferring my house had never actually been a transfer at all. The insurance company paid the filing fee. I paid nothing. That still doesn't feel like a sentence I'm allowed to say. And then she did the thing that mattered more, which took 20 minutes and cost $15. She recorded a notice against my address, a page that goes into the county's file on my house and tells the entire world that there is a lawsuit about who owns it. Anybody who looks the property up from that afternoon forward sees it. Every bank, every escrow officer, every buyer's agent doing a routine check the morning of a closing. My mother called me at 8 that night. She had heard from Delaney, who had heard from somebody at her office. She said, "You filed papers," she said, "on your own sister." She said the word lawyer like it was a diagnosis. She said, "Whatever this is, it's a family thing, and you have let the government into it, and now none of us can control what happens." She said, "Edie, she's your sister. There's 4 of us left." I stood in my backyard by the tomatoes that had gone to rope while I was in Reading, and I let her get all the way to the end of it. Then I said, "I know. Good night, Mom." I did not tell her about the deed. I did not tell her the name of the company or what the 5th of August was. She was going to find out what she had signed her name to in a room with a court reporter in it, and I needed her to find out there, and not from me, and not before. That was the first night I understood I was going to lose her either way. Friday afternoon, Barnard emailed me 2 addresses. The first one is a stucco house on the east side with a wheelchair ramp somebody built by hand. It belonged to a man who is 86 and who has been in a care facility since 2024. It transferred out of his name in October of that year, to a company, to a buyer, and then to a second buyer who lives in it now and who has done absolutely nothing wrong. The second one is a 2-story on the north end that 4 cousins inherited from an aunt and have been arguing about since 2019. Nobody lived there. Nobody checked. It transferred in July of last year while the 4 of them were still emailing each other about a roof. Same form, same wording in the same boxes, same seal at the bottom. 22 months, 3 houses, counting mine. Every one of them owned free and clear by somebody who was never going to walk into a county office and ask a stranger for a printout. A man in a facility. 4 cousins who don't speak. And a woman 400 miles away working a contract to pay for the house she'd already paid for. I sat with that email open for a long time, And the thing that finally landed was small and stupid, and it took the floor out from under me anyway. My sister did not pick me because she hates me. She picked me because I fit a profile. Somewhere in an office with a coffee machine, my name went on a list of houses that were easy, and I was the third one down. This was never about me at all, which meant it had never once been going to stop with me. The 1st of September was a Tuesday, and my grandmother opened the yellow envelope at her own kitchen table with Rosalind Kerr sitting across from her. Kerr asked her to open it. She didn't take it out of the drawer herself, and she didn't tell her what was in it. She said, "Ma'am, would you open this one and read it to us?" And my grandmother put her glasses on and got her thumb under the flap, and she was still talking about the water district while she did it. It was a reverse mortgage. That's a loan where a bank pays an old person for their house a piece at a time, and the whole balance comes due when they die or move out. So it's a good product for a person who understands it, and the last thing on earth you'd want signed in your name without you. $260,000, taken out on Poplar Street in June of last year. The money drawn down in 7 withdrawals and gone by January. 14 months with no property taxes paid and no insurance on the house. And the last paragraph, in the same size print as everything else, saying that a sale date was in the process of being set. She read the whole thing out loud in her church voice. Then she said, "I never signed anything like that." Kerr laid 2 more pages on the melon plate. The first one was the certificate that says an old person sat through the mandatory counseling call before signing, dated the 20th of May of last year, with my grandmother's signature at the bottom. She has never had that call. She was at the eye doctor that morning. I drove her. The second page was a form from the lender. 1 paragraph, 1 line for a signature. It certified that the borrower's daughter had read the entire loan package aloud to her mother in her presence, and that her mother had understood it. Denise Pruitt. My mother's handwriting. She dots the I in Denise with a little open circle. She has done that since high school. Then Kerr turned the file to the page the county had recorded, and I did not have to read the name under the stamp at the bottom of it. Same seal. Same man. 40 pages back in that black book, on a morning in June of last year, Hollis Barnard had already read the words, Poplar Street. That was the page he turned away from me on my own front step and held flat with the heel of his hand. And it is why the only thing he said afterward was a question about how long my sister had worked at that office. He just hadn't known yet whose grandmother lived at that address. My grandmother looked at it for a while. Then she folded that letter in half, and in half again, and in half again, into a square small enough to fit in the pocket of her apron, and she stood up to put the melon back in the refrigerator because it was getting warm. The next day I did the arithmetic on the back of an envelope at that same table. 260,000 off Poplar Street, 180,000 off Chestnut, $440,000. Kerr had also pulled the appraisal out of the loan file. Somebody valued my grandmother's house at $520,000. 4 houses on that block have sold in the last 2 years, and the best of them went for $395,000. You don't get an appraisal like that by accident. Somebody ordered it from a person who knew what number was wanted. My grandmother was at the sink with her back to me the whole time I added it up. She has washed dishes in that window since she was 9 years old. Her mother died in the front room. She was born in the back one, in November of 1946, and she has never once had another address to give anybody. She said, without turning around, "Where does an old woman go, Edie?" I called Kerr from the driveway and asked her exactly 2 questions. What day does the auction happen? And what is the one thing that stops it? She told me. It took her 4 minutes. I had spent 3 weeks counting days. Standing in that driveway, I stopped counting them and started picking one. Thursday, my grandmother did the next part herself, and that was the whole point. She is 79 and she is sharp as a tack, and she cannot read 8-point type anymore, and those are 3 separate facts that the men who did this to her had bet would blur together into one. so Kerr wouldn't let me sign anything for her. Not one thing. We drove to her own bank, the branch on Orangeburg, where she has had an account since 1971 and where the manager calls her Miss Verna. She signed a limited power of attorney letting me request records about the loan on her house and a release letting the lender hand those records to her attorney. A notary at the bank's own desk, a woman neither of us had ever met, working for the bank, not for us, watched her sign both, took her thumbprint, and wrote it in her book. A teller stood there as a witness. My grandmother made the phone call to the loan servicer herself. I dialed it and handed her the phone and sat down. The file came back on Saturday, 91 pages, and on Friday, Kerr made 2 more calls I didn't make. One to the county office that protects older adults from exactly this. One to a federal hotline, because that kind of loan is insured by the federal government, which means the man who signed a fake counseling certificate did not commit a local problem. He committed a federal one. Saturday night at 9, my sister called me for the first time since the 20th of August. Her voice was bright. She said, "Okay, so Sunday I'll come get the chest and bring the paperwork, and we can just be done with this whole nightmare." She said the buyer was being patient but not forever. She said, "Just have a pen ready and don't make it weird." She had no idea her broker had already been called. She had no idea what was sitting in 91 pages on my kitchen table. She had 2 days left of thinking she was winning, and she was going to spend them the way she'd spent all the others. Sunday morning I called Kerr at 7 and told her I was going to say yes. Not yes to signing, yes to the room, yes to the meeting, yes to the pen on the table, yes to being the sister who finally sees reason at the end of a long August. She was quiet for a second, and then she laughed once, without any humor in it, and said, "All right, then here are your 3. Say the sentence out loud before anyone sits down every time, no matter how strange it sounds. Sign nothing. Not a receipt, not an initial, not a box. And whatever they put in front of me, it goes home with me. Not a photograph of it. The paper itself in my hand when they walk out the door." She said, "If they hand you an original, do not give it back. People who forge documents are very careful about paper right up until they think they've won." I hung up and cleaned my kitchen. I washed the 2 good cups and set them upside down on a towel. I moved the 91 pages into my closet. I put a pen on the table, a cheap one, right in the middle where a person's eye goes, and I sat down across from it and waited for 2 o'clock with my hands folded. Somewhere in this county my sister was getting ready to hand me something, and she had spent 3 weeks believing that the most dangerous thing in the room would be her. They came at 2:10, and she brought a man with her. She said, "This is Dean. He's the notary I always use." Like she was introducing a caterer. He was about 40, in a golf shirt, with a soft leather folder under his arm and a stamp on a lanyard clipped inside it. He didn't shake my hand. He looked at my hallway twice on the way to the table. I stood at the head of the table and I said it. "I record anything to do with this house now. My lawyer's instruction. You're welcome to leave." Neither of them left. He set the folder down and unzipped it. There were 6 pages, and across the top of the first one in the date line, typed, the 1st of August. 12 days before I came home, 4 days before anything was recorded against my house. A brand new packet printed on paper still cool from an office machine, dated to a Saturday when I was 400 miles away, ready for me to sign as though I'd signed it back then. My sister sat down and put her purse on my chair and said, "Edie, look. You cannot afford to fight this. I've seen your accounts. I know what you make and I know what a lawyer costs, and I'm trying to get you out of here without a judgment following you around. I've seen your accounts." The man was already turning to the signature page and uncapping a pen when I said I'd read it overnight. He looked at my sister. She said, "Fine, whatever. Monday morning then," and stood up. He put his hand out for the packet. I said, "You brought it to me. It's mine now." And I set my palm flat on it. He asked to use my bathroom. He was gone about 90 seconds. and when I came out into the hallway, he wasn't at the bathroom door at all. He was standing at the end of the hall, at the wall by the linen closet, looking down at the 4 dents in my carpet where the cedar chest had sat for 7 years. Monday morning, Barnard laid 2 pieces of paper side by side on the hood of his car in my driveway. On the left, a photocopy of Gil Yarborough's handwritten receipt. $60, cedar chest, paid in full, with his own signature at the bottom and the date and the time printed under his name in his own hand, because I'd asked him for it in front of my neighbors on the 13th of August. On the right, a photograph of a line in a black-bound book. The 4th of August. My name. My license number. A thumbprint that isn't mine. Same day, same afternoon. 2 entries, an hour and a half apart. Gil Yarborough never came to a yard sale at my house. On the 4th of August, my sister drove him out to look at a property her office had coming up. And on the way back, she stopped at my place and let him take the chest out of my hallway, and she wrote him a receipt on the spot. Standing in my kitchen, an hour and a half after a man with a seal watched somebody sign my name in a room somewhere in this town. The chest went out of my house that afternoon and came back the same day, because the book had to go somewhere. Not her house. Her husband goes in her drawers. Not her office. That office has cameras and a broker who signs off on files. The one place in the world she was certain nobody would open was the bottom of a cedar chest in a house whose owner was 400 miles away and had 10 days to go on her contract. She hid it in my hallway. And on the 13th, she put that chest out on the lawn with a sold card on it and left it for last. The way you leave the one job you don't want anybody watching you do. The book was coming out from under that quilt before the chest ever went into Gil Yarborough's truck. Then a stranger browsing a folding table lifted the lid on her, and an hour after that I came home a day early and stood with my back against it. I have carried a folded receipt in my wallet since the 13th of August with a stranger's signature on it, and a date, and a time in his handwriting, and it turns out I have been carrying the clock, not the theft. The hour. That same Monday the suspension letter reached her broker. By 4 o'clock my sister's name had been taken off every listing that office had. She still hadn't opened her mail. They changed my locks on a Monday at 11 in the morning while I was at work. There is video, because there is a camera on my doorbell and a sign on my door under it that says so, which is the entire reason the video is worth anything. A locksmith's van. A man with a drill. My sister standing on my step in sunglasses with her arms folded, pointing at the deadbolt, then at the side door, then walking him around to the garage. I got home at 7:15 and my key went in 3/4 of the way and stopped. I stood there for a while with my hand still on it. The tomatoes were dead. There was a real estate box hanging on my doorknob. Kerr's second rule was in my ear the whole time. They will need me to do one wrong thing. A window would be one wrong thing. A locksmith of my own. A shoulder against the side door. A scene on my own porch at 7 at night in front of the Duffys. One wrong thing, and every piece of paper I'd built since the 17th of August gets read differently. So I took out my phone and photographed the new deadbolt from 4 feet. Then close enough to read the brand name in the ring and the serial number under the keyway. Then the fresh brass filings on my step. I sent all of it to Barnard with the time on it. Then I drove to a hotel on McHenry and paid $89 for a room and lay on top of the bedspread in my scrubs with the lights off. Every hour that woman kept me out of my house, she was adding to a bill she had no idea was being kept. And she had 22 days left to run it up. Wednesday, a letter came to the hotel, forwarded on letterhead. Vantage Row Holdings, LLC, 30 days to vacate the premises. Failure to remove personal property will result in disposal at owner's expense. And at the bottom, in the signature block, in blue ink, an actual human signature. Warren Cobb, managing member. 3 years of never coming inside my house. 3 years of sitting at the curb with the engine running while his wife did the part with the talking in it. That was not laziness. That was the design. He wanted the house he was going to live off of, and he did not want his handwriting anywhere near it. And then a lawyer's office charged him $110 for a form letter, and he signed it himself, in blue, under the name of the company that holds $180,000 of stolen mortgage debt, and mailed it to the woman whose signature was forged. The next afternoon, my sister posted a photograph on her page, a hand holding a ring of 4 new keys against a steering wheel. 6 words under it. Some things take longer than others. I didn't comment. I don't have that kind of account. I forwarded both, the letter and the photograph, with the date stamps, to Hollis Barnard, and I put my phone face down. He wrote back one line at 11 that night. Keep everything he signs. That Sunday, my sister brought our mother over to show her the house. I was at the Duffys. Ada had asked me to look at her sprinkler timer, which is the kind of thing you say to a woman who is living in a hotel 4 blocks from her own address, and I was on my knees at the side of their garage with the panel open when the car pulled into my driveway. My mother got out first. She stood on my walk with her hand shading her eyes, and she looked up at the roofline the way people do when they're deciding to be impressed. Delaney had a bag of takeout and the 4 new keys, and she opened my front door with them and held it, and said something with the word, "finally," in it. Tessa did not get out of the car. She's 16, my sister's stepdaughter, and she is the only person in that entire family who has ever said thank you to me for anything. She sat in the back seat with the door shut and her phone in her lap, not looking at it. Delaney came back down the walk and opened the car door and said something and went inside without her. And then Tessa got out, walked to the end of my driveway, and sat down on the curb. She sat there the whole time, 40 minutes, in the sun, on the concrete strip between my mailbox and the street, with her back to the house and her arms around her knees. Twice she turned her head toward the front window and then turned it back. Ada Duffy stopped talking. She stood in her own yard next to me with a rag in her hand, and she said quietly, "Why won't she go in the house, honey?" I did not go to that curb. That is the single hardest thing in this entire story, and I have to say it plainly. I stayed on my knees at a sprinkler box with my hands shaking, and I let a 16-year-old sit on my curb by herself for 40 minutes, because Rosalind Kerr had told me not to speak to anyone in that family without a lawyer present, and I had decided to be the kind of person who follows instructions. When they came out, my mother laughed at something. Tessa stood up and got in the car before either of them reached it, and she pulled her seatbelt across so hard the buckle cracked against the doorframe. 2 days later, the loan servicer froze the file on Poplar Street. Not because anybody in my family called them, because a county office that protects older adults had opened a case, and a federal line had logged a report about a counseling certificate signed by a woman who was at an eye appointment that morning, and both of those referrals landed on the same desk in the same week. The sale date came off the calendar pending review. The account the money had been drawn into got held. Kerr told me by voicemail while I was clocking out. I listened to it twice in the stairwell. That night, at 9:40, Warren was standing in the hotel parking lot next to my car. My mother had told Delaney where I was staying. Delaney had told him. That was the chain, and it took 9 days to run. He hadn't spoken to me in 3 years. He is a large man, and he stood a careful 8 feet away with his hands out of his pockets, which told me somebody had coached him, and he said, "Edie, just tell me where the book is." Not what book. Not what are you talking about. Not one syllable of the sentence a man says when his wife's sister has gone crazy about a yard sale. I stood by my door with my keys in my hand, and I said nothing at all, and he waited. And then he said it again with the word, "please," in front of it. I got in and locked the door and started the engine, and he stepped back onto the curb, and he was still standing there when I turned out onto the street. He'd had 3 years of never putting his name on anything. It took him 1 bad week to walk up to me in a parking lot and say it out loud in front of a camera on a pole. Thursday, Gil Yarborough decided to save himself. He came in with a folder. 68 years old, business license, 29 years of buying other people's furniture, and a wife with a heart condition, and Barnard put 2 documents in front of him. the receipt with his own signature at the bottom and the line from the black book, and asked him one question about the 4th of August. He gave them everything in 90 minutes, the address he was taken to see that afternoon, the name of the man who was buying my house, 4 other cleanouts he'd been called to in 2 years, and which office had called him each time, and a text message, still on his phone, sent to him by my sister at 11:12 in the morning on the 4th of August, which he had never deleted because he never deletes anything. She lands the 14th. Everything has to be gone. She lands the 14th. She'd asked me 3 times in June when my contract started. In our mother's kitchen. By text. In the pharmacy parking lot, with her hand on my car door. Being interested. She had my return date wrong by 1 day, and that is the only reason any of this exists. My last shift got cancelled, and I got on a standby seat out of Reading on the 13th instead of the 14th, and a shuttle van put me at the end of my own driveway at 4 in the afternoon, 20 hours early, and I found a cash box on my hood and a black book under a quilt that was supposed to be 400 miles away in a truck by then. The whole thing had a deadline in it, in her own words, in writing, at 11:12 in the morning, and every single person she'd hired to help her hit that deadline now had a copy of the text that proved she knew exactly what she was doing. On the Sunday my sister came to church. She does not go to church. She came to the 10 o'clock service at the church my grandmother has attended since 1963, and she sat in the 4th row, and afterward, in the fellowship hall, over coffee in foam cups, she stood in a group of 6 women with her hand on my grandmother's shoulder and said it. We're just trying to keep it in the family, but Edie's got lawyers involved now. She's dragged Grandma into a lawsuit. At 79, I was 3 feet away holding a plate. My grandmother turned to me. And she does not know. That is the thing. She knows about the loan and she knows what her own daughter's signature is on, but she does not know why a lawyer would put a page on file telling the whole world her house is being fought over, and she cannot hold 6 weeks of paperwork in her head at once. And standing there in her good coat in a room full of women she has known for 50 years, all she heard was the word lawsuit and her own name in it. She took her hand off my arm. She didn't mean anything by it. She reached for her purse and the movement took her hand off my arm and she did not put it back. And Ada Duffy's sister looked at the floor, and my sister let it sit there for exactly as long as it needed to. I could have ended it in 1 sentence. All I had to do was say the words reverse mortgage in that fellowship hall, in front of every woman who has ever brought her a casserole, and tell them that her house has $260,000 of somebody else's money on it, and 14 months of unpaid taxes, and that her daughter certified she'd read it all aloud. She'd have never walked back into that room again as long as she lived. I put my plate down and I said, "The coffee's terrible, Grandma. I'll make you a real one at home." And I looked at my watch, once, and put my hands back in my coat pockets, and let my sister have the room. 9 days. On the last day of September, a man's commission quietly expired, and a clock nobody in that group had thought about started running. Dean Whitlock's authority to hold a stamp ran out on the 30th, and he had not filed to renew it. Kerr found that in about 4 minutes because it's public, and she called me from a parking garage to explain what it meant, and I sat down on a bench outside the hospital to listen. When a man like that stops being commissioned, he has 30 days to hand his book, the actual bound book, every page, over to the county clerk. Not shred it, not lose it, deliver it. His deadline was the 30th of October. He could report it stolen. A sentence he'd have to put in writing, on a form, about a book that had been sitting in a cedar chest in the house of a woman whose name is forged inside it. He could stay quiet and miss the deadline, which is its own separate offense, on top of every other thing. Or he could produce it. And he couldn't, because it had been in a county evidence locker since the 19th of August on a seizure receipt with my name printed on the top line. He called me 3 times that week. Once at 6:40 in the morning, he left 2 voicemails. The second one starts, "Ms. Pruitt, I think there's been a mix-up with a document I notarized, which is a remarkable sentence for a man to say into a stranger's phone and leave a recording of. I didn't answer and I didn't delete. I forwarded both to Hollis Barnard the same day, at the same hour, without listening past the first line. That man had spent 2 years selling the only thing he owned, which was his word that he had watched somebody sign. He had 30 days to go find it. My mother called me at 12:20 in the morning on the 1st of October. She had been served that afternoon, not arrested, asked in writing to come in and answer questions under oath about a document with her signature on it, with a date and a room number and a line telling her she could bring an attorney. She has cried on the phone to me maybe 40 times in my life, and every single one of those times it was about my sister. This was not that sound. She said she hadn't read it. She said Delaney brought a stack over on a Tuesday and said Grandma's already signed hers. This one's just yours. And she signed at the tab, at the kitchen table, while the water was running. She said, I thought it was for the taxes. She said, I never read anything that girl brings me. I never have. And she said that, like it was a defense. Then she said, Edie, you're the one who started it. So make it go away. Call your lawyer and tell them it was a family misunderstanding and make it stop. There was a long piece of quiet on that line. I said, Mom, it isn't mine to stop. And then I gave her the name and number of a defense attorney in Modesto, a good one, who does not work for me, who has never met Rosalind Kerr, and who could tell her what her own signature had cost her without wondering what I wanted out of it. She said, So that's how it is. And I said, No, that's the only honest thing I've got. And she hung up. I sat on the edge of a hotel bed with the phone in both hands until the screen went dark, and then I got up and folded the scrubs I'd left on the chair, sleeve, in half, the way you do, so they'll fit. The next evening, Warren moved out of my sister's house, and at 9 o'clock, my phone rang with a number I didn't know. Aunt Edie, it's Tessa. She has called me that since she was 13, which is not a thing anyone taught her to do. Her mother died in 2022. Her father remarried the next year. She has spent 3 years in a house with 2 adults who both had a use for her, and neither of whom was ever exactly looking at her. She wanted to know if she could keep her bike in my garage. Her dad was leaving and taking the truck, and the garage at their house had gotten locked, and her bike was the good one, the one her mom picked out, and she said it fast and flat, like a girl who has learned that asking for something is a transaction you can lose. My garage was locked too, with a key I didn't have. I said, Don't put it in a garage, I'll get you something better. The next morning, I rented a storage unit on Yosemite Boulevard, 10 by 10, $94 a month, paid 6 months up front, and I texted her a photograph of the code pad and the code. She wrote back, Is it just mine? I wrote, It's just yours. She didn't answer for a quarter of an hour, and then she sent back a single letter K, and I sat in that parking lot and looked at the K for longer than a person should look at one letter. Saturday, my sister came to the hotel to apologize. She sat in the chair by the window with her purse in her lap and did it well. She's always been good at this part. She talked about how hard the last few years had been, and about Warren, and how nobody in this family has ever helped her the way everybody helped me. And she said the thing she'd clearly built the whole trip around. You don't have kids, so you don't actually understand what it's like to be responsible for somebody. You've only ever had to take care of you. I let that sit in the room until it got uncomfortable, which took about 6 seconds. Then I said, No, just that. She waited for the rest of it, and there wasn't any. And she started again. About how we could still fix this, quietly, and how Grandma doesn't need to be dragged through it. I reached into my bag and put a photocopy on the table and turned it around so it faced her. 6 pages, the date line at the top, the 1st of August. She looked at it for a long time. Her mouth did something small. I said, You handed me that on the 6th of September and asked me for a pen. I've had it for 4 weeks. She stood up so fast the chair moved. She said I had always been like this. She said, in a hotel room, with her hand on the door, "You'd rather be right than have a family." And she was very nearly crying when she said it, and I believe she meant it. I said, "You'd rather have my house than a sister." We both found out what we'd rather have. She left the door open behind her. On Monday morning, my sister sent a photograph to the family group with 3 people left in it. A sold sign in front of my house, sun on the lawn, the tomatoes brown at the bottom of the frame, and under it, "Closing tomorrow. Onward." My mother didn't reply. I didn't reply. At noon, Rosalind Kerr sent me a list with 3 lines on it. 8:30 tomorrow morning, Department 12. Our request to stop the auction on my grandmother's house, filed at the end of September, argued in front of a judge. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning on the courthouse steps, out in the open air where they do it. The auction itself. 90 minutes later. Same building. And 9:40 tomorrow morning in an escrow office on the other side of town. The sale of my house, rescheduled to close after 2 suspensions, with a new buyer's lender who had done their check 3 weeks ago and had not run it again. 3 clocks. One morning. All of them wound by a piece of paper somebody had walked into a public office and asked for. I read that list 4 times in my car with the engine off, and then I put my phone in the glove box. My sister was going to put on something nice and go to a closing. At 8:30 on the 6th of October in Department 12, a judge stopped the auction. It took 19 minutes. Kerr walked him through it. A loan taken in the name of a woman who was at an eye appointment on the day she supposedly took her counseling call. A certification signed by a daughter now under oath about it. A criminal case number. And the notice telling the world the ownership of that house is in litigation. She asked him to read the notice into the record. He did. The other side sent a young man from a servicing firm who said the word "unfortunately" twice. My grandmother sat in the 3rd row in her church hat with her purse on her knees. When the judge said the sale would not go forward, she didn't react at all. She has a face for public rooms. Then her hand came over and closed around my wrist, hard enough that her ring turned, and she held on like that while the next matter was called. At 10 o'clock, a man from the trustee's office came out onto the courthouse steps with a clipboard, because he has to, and read a case number aloud, and announced that the sale of a property on Poplar Street had been postponed by order of the court. There were 4 people on those steps, 2 of them investors with folding chairs. None of them was us. We watched through the glass from the 2nd floor, because Kerr said standing out there was theater and theater is for people who need it. The auctioneer got in his car at 10:04. That house was built in 1938, and nobody has ever gotten my grandmother out of it. At 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in October, a man with a clipboard failed to be the first and drove away, and the steps were empty in the sun. At 9:40 that same morning, on the other side of Modesto, Marlene Ostrander ran one last search. She didn't have to. Everybody in the room had their coats off and a pen out, and the wire had already been requested. But a woman who has had $180,000 stop dead in her hands once already that year does not want it to happen twice. And she pulled it up one more time while the parties were sitting down. 2 things came back on my address. The notice of the lawsuit, and, under it, added the previous Thursday, a criminal case number out of the district attorney's office. She closed her laptop and said the transaction could not fund. The buyer's agent asked her to repeat it. The buyer's lender killed the wire from a phone in the hallway inside of 4 minutes, and the deposit money that had been sitting in that escrow account since August, including the $2,600 my sister needed by that Monday, the money my mother had moved out of my father's account at 9:10 in the morning on the 17th of August so the file wouldn't cancel, reversed out of the account, and went back where escrow had received it from, which was not my mother. It went to a company account that a federal agency had frozen the week before. Minus fees. My sister was sitting in that room. She had done her hair. I was at the courthouse. I found out at 11:15 from Kerr, and it took me until that evening to do the arithmetic on it. On Monday, the 17th of August at 8:35 in the morning, I stood at a public counter and paid for 3 certified copies and mailed 2 letters. My mother moved the money at 9:10. 35 minutes. My mother's savings went into a transaction that had been dead for 35 minutes and did not know it, killed by a stranger with a stamp and a woman in line who had asked for a printout. By that afternoon, the paper was in 5 places at once. Kerr had built the packets in September and held them, which I understand completely now. The county investigator's file, the office that protects older adults, the federal inspector's line, because a government-insured loan and a false counseling certificate is a federal matter, not a county one. The mortgage fraud desk at the Bureau's Sacramento field office, and a set of certified copies to the county clerk, who now had a very specific interest in a book that was supposed to be surrendered by the 30th. They went out on the same day, on purpose, because 5 offices that learn about a thing on the same Tuesday cannot each assume another one is handling it. Warren's accounts were held by Thursday. On Friday, the registered agent for Vantage Row Holdings LLC, the service company whose address a shell uses so it looks like it has an office, resigned, which they do in writing, which is public, and which is the corporate version of a man stepping off a boat. That's what my sister had built. A company that was a mailbox and a man's signature in blue ink. Whitlock broke on the Wednesday, not a confession. People always want the story where somebody stands up and admits it and everyone feels something. Nothing about this was that. The book had been in an evidence locker since the 19th of August. Gil's text was on a phone in a folder. My badge report had 21 pages of doors I opened 400 miles north. Dean Whitlock walked into the district attorney's office with a defense attorney at 9 in the morning on the 7th of October because his own book was going to be read out loud by other people whether he was in the room or not. And the only thing left he owned was the order in which it happened. He gave them the 2 other houses, the man in the care facility, the 4 cousins, and the roof. He gave them dates, and he gave them who called him and what he was paid, which was $300 a signature. And he told them who had kept his book. He'd wanted it back since the middle of August. She wouldn't give it to him. As long as my sister had that book, he could not go to anybody first. His own name was inside it on every page, and hers was on none of them. That's not a partnership. That's a collar. She'd hidden the one thing that could end her in the one place she was sure nobody would ever open. And then her sister came home a day early. On the 10th of October, I hired a lawyer for a 16-year-old. Nobody had asked me to. Tessa's name had not come up in any file I had seen. Her father's accounts were frozen, her stepmother was 2 weeks from an arraignment, and there was not one person left in that family whose interests were the same as hers. Her name is Priya Raghunathan, and she does juvenile and dependency work, and she costs $340 an hour, and I pay her out of my own account, not the insurance company's, and she does not report to me. That was the point. I told her at the first meeting that I did not want to be told anything Tessa said. I signed what Warren asked me to sign so she could stay at her school and finish the volleyball season with her team. I drove her to 2 practices, and in the same week I told Kerr no twice. No, I will not write a letter to the court asking for leniency for my sister. No, I will not reduce the restitution demand to keep it in the family, my mother asked. My grandmother did not, which I will be grateful for until I die. On the Monday, at the end of a meeting about school forms, Tessa asked her lawyer a question with me sitting right there. She said, "If somebody signs a name because a grown-up told them it was okay, is that the same thing as if they just did it?" Priya Raghunathan set down her pen and asked me, very pleasantly, if I would mind waiting in the hall. On the 13th of October, a state board suspended my sister's license pending revocation. She has had it since 2021. She studied for that exam at our mother's kitchen table with a highlighter, and she was the first person in our family to hold a professional license of any kind, and I took her to dinner the night she passed, and I paid. The suspension letter went to her broker at the same time it went to her, and her broker did what brokers do, when the district attorney's office has already called him twice. He met her in the lobby. He did not let her go back to her desk. Ada Duffy's niece works 2 doors down from that office and saw it through the front glass. My sister came out onto the sidewalk at 4 in the afternoon holding a cardboard box against her hip with a coffee mug in it and a framed thing and a plant. I have never told anybody what happened to me when I heard that, and I'm not going to dress it up now. On the 13th of August, she set a cash box down on the hood of my car in front of my neighbors and opened it. On the 13th of October, she carried a box out to her own car in front of hers. Nobody planned that. Nobody could. Some things just come back around at the same height they left. She called me from the parking lot before she'd even put the box in the trunk. She had an offer. She'd give the house back. All of it, signed over, tomorrow, whatever paper I wanted. She'd pay Grandma back, on a schedule. All I had to do was tell the district attorney's office that the family had resolved it privately and that I no longer wished to participate, and write one letter for the board. She said, "You'd still have everything you had in August. Nothing lost. You win, Edie. Just let me keep my life." I had one piece of paper of my own by then. I'd drafted it with Kerr on the 2nd of October, and I'd been carrying it in my bag for 11 days, waiting for exactly this phone call. Because Kerr had told me in September that it would come, and roughly what it would sound like. It's 2 pages. It demands $440,000 in restitution. The $260 off my grandmother's house, and the $180 off mine. And the second page says that I will not enter into any private settlement, will not seek withdrawal of any criminal referral, and will not communicate with any defendant except through counsel. I read her the second page over the phone. I didn't editorialize on it. She said, "You're going to let them put me in a room with strangers." I said, "You put an old woman's house in one." At 20 past 4, a detective I had never spoken to called my phone. He was careful with it. He asked me to confirm my name and my date of birth, and he asked whether I was the complaining party on a case out of the recorder's office, and I said yes, and stood up out of my chair without knowing why. He said a juvenile had walked into the front lobby of the police department alone, about 40 minutes ago, on foot. Nobody with her. She had come up to the counter and put a piece of lined notebook paper on it, and asked the officer at the desk who she was supposed to talk to if she wanted to confess to something. He said she had given my name. He said, "Ma'am, is there a 16-year-old in this family?" I had gone back on Tuesday to drop off the school forms Priya needed signed, and I was in the hallway outside her office with my hand on the wall, and the last thing my sister had said to me was, "Let me keep my life." And I had been so proud of the 2 pages in my bag, and the whole thing turned over in my chest at once. Tessa had asked her lawyer a question on Monday and gotten a careful answer, and then she had gone home and spent a night and most of a school day by herself with it, and on Tuesday afternoon she'd walked 2.5 miles to a police station to hand a grown man a piece of paper. The paper was 30 lines of pencil, 30 lines, on notebook paper, front side only, in the handwriting of a girl who had turned 16 in February. My name. Edie Pruitt. Edie Pruitt. Edie Pruitt. All the way down, getting better as it goes. The first ones are careful and wrong. By the 20th, the lean is right. The last 4 are mine. On the 4th of August, in a room in this town, my sister took her stepdaughter with her because school hadn't started, and she had nowhere else to put her. And at that table she put a page in front of her, and said the sentence Tessa repeated twice at the station and once, later, to a judge. "Your aunt asked me to handle it, honey. She's busy this week. Just sign one thing for her. She knows." A man watched her do it. He wrote my name in his book, and he took the thumbprint of the person in front of him, because the paper on that table was a deed, and that is the one part of the job the law does not let him skip. The thumbprint in that book is a 16-year-old girl's. She had practiced for 2 days so that it would look right, because she is a person who does things properly, and she'd kept the practice sheet in the zip pocket of her volleyball bag for 10 weeks. The interview stopped 4 seconds after she started talking. In this state, a 16-year-old has to talk to an attorney before she can be questioned, and she is not allowed to give that right away, not even if she walks in on her own 2 feet and offers. The officer stopped her mid-sentence and made a phone call, and that is why the only complete version anyone got that day was the one on the paper. She had signed my house away with my name, and she had come by herself to say so, and she had not told one adult she was going. I did not hide it. I want that on the record more than anything else in this story. Rosalind Kerr sat across from me that night and laid it out straight. My sister's defense had exactly one road left. My niece signed it. The aunt is covering for the niece. This family is a mess and nobody knows who signed what. Tessa's practice sheet was, in the wrong order, the best gift my sister could have been handed. So we sent it in the right order. The sheet was already theirs. She'd handed it over herself. What wasn't theirs yet was the reason for it. So that went in first, on its own, before anybody's theory could set. Priya Raghunathan's letter, my declaration, and the practice sheet, refiled under both. 2 days later, and not 1 hour sooner, the messages. The 2 days of messages my sister sent that child before, and on the 4th of August, telling her to sign and telling her not to mention it to her father, because he'll make it a whole thing. Priya turned those over herself, with her client's consent and in writing, because it was the only thing in that file that helped the girl. Send it the other way around and Tessa is a suspect who got explained. Send it this way and she is what she actually is, which is a minor who is directed by a parent figure, and everything my sister did to her becomes another count instead of a defense. Kerr told me plainly that jurors like a clean victim, and that handing them a forged signature with my own niece's hand on it could cost me sympathy I would want in a courtroom. I told her to send it Monday morning. The 17th of November was a Tuesday, and my sister's preliminary hearing and our default hearing were in the same building, 40 minutes apart. The hallway on the second floor has benches down one side and a window at the end. Tessa was in a navy dress somebody at her school had lent her, sitting between me and her lawyer, and when the deputies brought my sister down the corridor with her attorney, she stood up before I could put a hand out. She walked over and she held out a folded piece of lined paper. A copy. The original was evidence by then. Priya had made her one so she'd have it. Delaney looked at it and did not take it. Tessa said, "I kept it because I knew one day I'd need it." Her voice didn't do anything dramatic. "I just didn't know it would be to save somebody." She held it there another second, and then put it in my sister's coat pocket, the way you'd give bus money to a child, and turned around. She came back down the hall and sat down next to my grandmother, who was in her church hat on the third bench with her cane between her knees, and she took her hand and put her head on the old woman's shoulder and left it there. Down the hall in Department 14, 40 minutes later, nobody stood up for Vantage Row Holdings LLC. Nobody ever had. They were served on the 31st of August and they never answered, because a company that is a mailbox and a resigned agent cannot walk into a courtroom, and default had been entered at the beginning of October. So the judge did what you do at the end of that road. He took evidence, the certified copies from the 17th of August, my badge report from Reading, the line from the Black Book, a 30-line sheet of notebook paper marked as an exhibit. Then he said the sentence I had been paying lawyers and losing a family to hear, that the instrument recorded against my property on the 5th of August was void from its inception, that it transferred nothing to anyone, and that it be expunged from the records of this county. Void from the beginning, not undone, never a deed at all. My grandmother stood up. Kerr had asked the court for a moment and he'd given it to her, and she got up on her cane in the second row of an almost empty courtroom, 80 years old in 3 days, and said it to the judge in her church voice. She paid for every dollar of that house herself. 2 jobs, 5 years, and she never asked me for one thing. I signed what I signed because I trusted the other one, not because that one wasn't worth it. I was 12 years old on a curb in October, watching a stranger decide which of my boxes were worth carrying. I sat in Department 14 at 31, and a man with a docket and an old woman with a cane both said out loud in a public room, on a record that will exist after all of us, that the thing was mine and always had been. It's March now, 5 months since that Tuesday in October. My sister pled in January and was sentenced on the 11th of February. Forgery, recording a false instrument, financial abuse of an elder, and the federal counts for the loan on Poplar Street were resolved together. She'll be in custody for a while, and on paper considerably longer than that. Her license was revoked permanently. Her name is in the state's public discipline bulletin for that month, which anybody can look up, and which does not come down. Ever. There is no version of the next 30 years where she introduces herself to a stranger in this industry, and that isn't findable in 4 seconds. The civil judgment came to $440,000, and Kerr recorded it with this county as a page that follows a name. Which means my sister can work, and save, and rebuild, and the day her name goes onto any piece of real estate in Stanislaus County, that property grows a lien instead of an owner. It runs 10 years. It renews. She has spent her whole adult life moving names on and off of paper. Her name on a house now creates a debt, not a deed. Her petition to adopt Tessa, filed last May, was denied and closed. She will never be that girl's mother on any document anywhere. Dean Whitlock surrendered a commission that had already expired and will not be granted another one in this state. The company that bonded him came after every dollar it paid out. At the preliminary hearing in November, he sat in the box and was walked through his own book line by line and asked to read each entry aloud, in order, including the 4th of August, including my name in his own handwriting. Marlene Ostrander's escrow company lost its license for 90 days and paid a settlement to the title insurer, who came after $180,000 and got most of it. Her office spent the winter calling every client from 2 years back to explain what a verification step is and why theirs got skipped. She wrote me a letter. 2 paragraphs, handwritten, no lawyer's language in it. I wrote back 1 line thanking her for running the search a second time on the 6th of October, because she didn't have to. Warren's company was dissolved. He was charged federally for the money that moved through it, and the truck he used to idle at my curb was seized in November. He's renting in the complex off Coffee Road that he told my sister at Thanksgiving in 2024 was for people who had given up. My mother testified at the preliminary hearing about her own signature on a lender's form, certifying that she had read a loan package aloud to her mother. She was not charged. She lives in Turlock still. The room she had picked out for herself at Poplar Street, the one she used to talk about at holidays, is not going to be hers. My grandmother has not said so out loud. She doesn't have to. Tessa doesn't pick up when she calls. I've asked her twice to answer. That's her decision to make, and I've stopped making it for her. My grandmother turned 80 in November and she is still on Poplar Street. The loan was voided out of the fraud file, and the lender wrote off what it couldn't recover from the people who took it. The back taxes and the 20 months of insurance came out of the first restitution payment, and the county straightened the record in February. Her name is on that house alone, the way it has been since 1979, and the yellow letters stopped coming. In January, I hired 2 men with a dolly and sent the cedar chest back up to Poplar Street. It's in her front room now under the window with the quilt in it and a lamp on top. 1 wall away from the room she was born in. She keeps her Christmas things in it and complains that it's too far from the closet. There's a mark on the lid. A soft gray rectangle about the size of a playing card where an orange sticker sat in the sun for a week in August, and the glue never entirely came up. I had a bottle of the stuff that takes it off. I stood there with it in my hand for a while, and then I put it back under her sink. Everybody who comes into that room asks about it eventually. And every single time, my grandmother gets to be the one who tells them. Tessa turned 17 in February. She lives with me on Chestnut Avenue under a guardianship her father agreed to and signed, and her bike is in my garage, which has my locks on it. She sat at my kitchen table last week with a community college catalog open and a highlighter, which is a thing I have seen a woman in this family do at a kitchen table before, and I had to go stand at the sink for a second. She's going to do 2 years and then apply to the county. Records. The recorder's office, the actual counter, the one where a clerk in a cardigan hands people certified copies of the papers that decide what belongs to them. I asked her why that. Of everything. She said, because somebody should have been checking the signatures. Then she asked whether we were putting the tomatoes in this weekend. And we did. On Saturday. 6 plants along the south fence where the light is best, and I set the timer on the sprinklers for 6 in the morning, and when they came on Sunday, I was standing at the window in my own house with a cup of coffee, watching the water go around. I'm Edie Pruitt. I'm 31. And I want to be honest with you about what was actually taken from me that August, because it wasn't a house. A house is a number and a piece of paper, and I could have gotten another one eventually. What she took was the thing I built at 12 years old on a curb, watching somebody else decide which of my boxes were worth keeping. The idea that if I worked hard enough and got my name on the right document, something in this world would finally be mine and nobody could reach in and move it. She reached in. She had my keys and she used them, and for about 6 weeks I lived like a woman who owns nothing anywhere. I got it back. Not from the house. From a woman 3 days short of 80 standing up on a cane in an almost empty courtroom, and a 16-year-old who walked 2.5 miles alone to tell the truth about a thing she'd been tricked into doing. So here's what I'd ask you. Somewhere in your family, is there a person everybody has quietly agreed to keep making excuses for? And what has that agreement already cost the quietest person in the room? Tell me down in the comments. I read them. All of them, and there are people in that comment section who have been through the version of this that doesn't end in a courtroom, and they are the ones you should listen to. Thank you for staying with me all the way through this one. Take care of the people in your family who don't ask for anything. I'll see you in the next story.